the cloud, I think. Yeah, okay. All right, so let's officially start the event. I'm absolutely delighted that Craig has been able to join us today. I did mention to Craig when I last spoke to him that there is a preamble, and what's come up today is vaccinations and Motown and regentrification, so you can take your pick from that lot. It's interesting. I'm just looking at the demographic today. It's there's possibly more Americans on the call than Brits. I don't know what that means for DP UK per se, but certainly an interesting statistic today. So with respect to Craig, I say Craig Ciccone, but I think you say Ciccone, don't you? Is that how you pronounce it?
Ciccone.
Ciccone. Craig's got basically 30 years experience around the JFK assassination research. His focus has been primarily on the JFK assassination and specifically the witness locations around the actual assassination point. But he has done work on other stuff as well. The Tippit scene, and also the Ambassador Hotel. So for those of you that are interested in the RFK assassination, that's pretty interesting too, potentially. I actually reached out to Craig, I don't know how long ago it was, but it was as a result of the Project JFK CSI guys hosting an event in which Craig spoke. He talked specifically about the schematic that he's created and the accompanying book that goes with it. For those of you who are eagle-eyed, behind me, actually, on the wall, is Craig's work in its full glory. And he sent that over to me from the States, and how I've obviously had it framed and mounted. I think actually it's a fantastic piece. It basically tackles the research angle, which we as kind of serious enthusiasts / researchers are interested in, but it's also a really good aesthetic as well. I mean, one could argue it's a piece of art. So I'm really pleased with it. There are others, of course, in the community that have produced things like this. Most of you are probably aware of Don Robideau's work, but I think Craig has really done well here in getting the visual look right as well as the information right. I mean, Don's is absolutely chock-a-block with stuff. So that's the schematic. This is the book. This is the book that comes with the schematic. And this is really a reference guide. It lists all of the witnesses in and around Dealey Plaza, it's not a typical JFK assassination research book. It's more of a reference guide, and it's really, I think the target market is people like us, quite frankly. As I said, I did have a chat with Craig a few weeks ago, and certainly his research and his journey has evolved over the last few decades. It's clear that he had a bit of a rethink. He moved away from second-hand, third-hand type of research, where you focus on other authors' books and other authors' research pieces, and he went more to primary sources and critically reviewed his own work, and he's broadened the scope as well. And I'm sure Craig will get into more detail about that. For me, I think the most interesting thing is, certainly about the book, is that if there is a specific witness or character that you're interested in, it's a really good guide in terms of where you can find depositions, testimonies, interviews, and so forth. So Craig's going to go through his presentation and explain the complexities, behind doing this, and he may touch on Oak Cliff and California as well. I think like every meeting that we have, obviously this is the first one for this year. If we can keep to a similar format in terms of questions, at an appropriate time, feel free to intervene, or if you would prefer to write a question in the chat application, then I can pick it up, or if you want me to ask the question for you, I'm happy to do that. So without further ado, Craig, off you go.
All right, thank you, Neil. In preparing this for this meeting, it recalled for me the only memorable line from the absolutely forgettable Godfather 3. And that is, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. So I thank you for that, Neil. Now, when I thought I was out, Neil touched upon it. Much like Matt, mid 80s, I was in high school, not college. And that's when I got into the JFK assassination. Inexplicably, one of my mother's friends, without any prompting whatsoever, brought over a box of materials that he thought that I'd be interested in. And it happened to be a bunch of books on the Kennedy assassination, some original teletype readouts from when HISCA was in session. And the first book I grabbed was They've Killed the President by Robert Sam Anson. And I think, like a lot of teenagers who think that they know everything and their parents don't know anything, I was immediately struck by how it was my mother's generation could have believed such a lie like the Warren Commission. So I was hooked, and I started my study in earnest. So by about 1990, I decided that I wanted to start lecturing at local colleges and universities, and I realized in so doing that I didn't have any kind of visual reference to Dealey Plaza. So I couldn't ask my audience to close their eyes and envision a pear, and that was the shape of Dealey Plaza. So imagine, a car driving towards the bottom of the pear and then turn to the, around the first curve of the pear. I couldn't do that. So at the time I was working at a picture framing shop and knew an architect who I asked if he could plot Dealey Plaza and make a big blow up that I could then take to these presentations and these lectures to give an aid. And he was all about that. It basically was just the buildings and the topography of Dealey Plaza with the presidential motorcade in the middle of the street. It was only after I started doing lectures that I realized, well, why don't I put some of the witnesses, the key witnesses, on there as well? And then it just snowballed from there. My initial impetus was Josiah Thompson's 6 Seconds in Dallas from 1967.
Oh, yeah.
That had a map, obviously a small map in his book, but he did the same thing, mostly with photographers, because that was one of his emphases were the photographers and the photographs. So I took that idea and ran with it, and since the plot had already been put onto an architect's computer, like it was a CAD drawing that architects use, it was easy for my friend Greg to just plot as many witnesses as I wanted. And I said, well, why not plot as many witnesses as I can find? So I used Josiah Thompson. I used Mark Lane, who in his book, Rush to Judgment, just had a listing of eyewitnesses that either gave deposition or testified before the Warren Commission. And I just went from there. And when I was finished with that, I started attending the Assassination Symposium on Kennedy, or the ASK conferences in Dallas in 1991 and 1992. And I started selling the schematic and the list there. And it was quite useful to a lot of researchers. So I felt like I was contributing to something. Like Neil alluded to, it wasn't an analysis per se. It wasn't a book on the Kennedy assassination that analyzed something with original research. It was more of a database. That was my intent. So not soon after that, I became disenchanted with some of the aspects, some of the seedier aspects of the JFK research community, a lot of the backbiting and a lot of the egos. And I was then turned to different political assassinations of the 1960s. And it brought me to studying one of the younger and lesser known casualties of the 60s here in the United States. His name was Fred Hampton, and he was the leader of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. And he was killed when he was only 21 in a police raid of his apartment in 1969. And so a lot of my research for the past 30 years has been on his life and his death, specifically trying to get his FBI records released. So just like not Jan Wiener, was it John? John Wiener. It took him 25 years to get John Lennon's FBI file released. It's taken me 25 years to get the FBI to release Fred Hampton's file, and they're still about halfway short. But anyway, in 1996, I had an occasion to go back to my schematic and my list, and I thought that I was just going to be making some minor updates, some things that I had learned, some things that had been discovered. But much to my horror, I realized that a lot of the things that I had placed on my original schematic was in fact incorrect. I had relied entirely too much on the confidence of these resources that I was using and did not check those sources, did not double check those sources for their veracity, and basically just took everybody at their word and added it to my work. As far as witnesses' positions, as far as what their opinions were as to the direction of shots, and I describe this a lot better in my book, that I was basically putting words in people's mouths. The investigators obviously they were not prepared to take accurate statements from these eyewitnesses, or just simply failed to, whether it was gross incompetence or simply just a negligence on their part. So if an eyewitness was vague about where they were or where they thought the shots had come from, I interpreted what they said, and I realized how misleading that was. I did not want to. If a witness said that they thought the shots came from west of the Texas School Book Depository, they said that the shots came from the knoll. So, and that's not right, because there are lots of points west of the Texas School Book Depository that doesn't necessarily mean the knoll. So I decided that I was going to go back and I was going to basically start over again. And I created a file for every single witness that I could find, to find every statement that they gave to any of the investigative bodies. But these were official statements. Look, if I had wanted to compile a list of all of the different interviews that all of these witnesses had given over the years, I'd still be working on that list. You understand what I'm saying? Because I know that over the years, different anniversaries of the assassination, certain eyewitnesses have been profiled, and they give their recollections of 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to stick with the official record and their earliest recollection, figuring that was the most reliable. Even if it was confusing, even if it wasn't complete, that was the statement of record. So I did that. So I spent 15 years going back over original FBI documents, Secret Service reports and documents, the Dallas Sheriff's Office, the Dallas Police Office. With the emergence at that time of the internet and the subsequent adding of things on the internet, like digital databases, the municipals, the city of Dallas, their municipal website was incredibly helpful when I redid this, because they had all of the original statements of witnesses, eyewitnesses, digitized and ready to see online. So I relied on that as well. Another resource that was incredibly helpful to me was the 6th floor museum in Dallas, Texas. Apparently they had been taking the oral histories of witnesses, well, not just witnesses, but people in and around Dallas to get their oral histories. Of course, it centered on and focused on people who were there at the time. So there were lots of eyewitnesses that had never been identified before, that had never given a statement before for various reasons. And those oral histories were available online for the first time, and I utilized that as well. So like I said, I completely redid everything, and I feel very confident with what I started republishing back in 2010, which is what Neil has on his wall and on his bookshelf. And before I go too much further, I do want to say, if anybody has any questions at any time, please don't feel like you guys are interrupting any particular, set presentation that I have. If you have any questions or suggestions, throw them out, because I can't emphasize that enough, is that I intended for this project to be an ongoing, ever-growing database, relying on other researchers who may have access to information, who have had access to information that I didn't. It's a collective. So this list and this map can only be as good as the feedback that I get from it. So please, if you have any questions or suggestions, let me know.
Craig, I'm just going to share my screen and put up one of the images that you sent me, which was the schematic that's on the wall behind me. So I'll just put that up for you. Okay.
So the schematic is intended to obviously plot the witnesses for a visual reference. Now, one of the problems that I had obviously was, okay, well, where do I put the motorcade in the street? And when I say the motorcade, you can see all the different cars. Now, this schematic was not intended to be scrutinized by the foot. That is, I didn't do any study of any of the positions of the cars as far as how far back they were, how close they were. This is simply just because as you can see towards the triple underpass, I have the front cars and the front motorcycles that had already left Dealey Plaza by the time the presidential motorcade was in the position of the first shot. They had already gone under the triple underpass, but I wanted to show its existence. So I put it back in Dealey Plaza, even though it in fact had already left. And I wanted to include as many cars and vehicles as possible. So what do I have there? Sorry, I can't see it very well, Neil. So I'll refer to mine.
Okay.
So the last the last vehicle that I have coming into Dealey Plaza that's shown on the map is the White House Press Bus number 1. Well, the White House Press Bus number 1 wasn't approaching yet. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I took some liberties as far as the positioning of the motorcade, simply to show the different cars, to show as many cars as I could. So that was an editorial decision on my part, as opposed to what was really historically accurate. Neil, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the gentleman who did that wonderful moving Dealey Plaza.
Yeah,
map.
so that's a guy, Mark Tyler.
Yes.
Yeah.
I watched I
yeah,
watched that.
if you go to miketyler.org, anybody that wants to pick it up, it's an animation
Yes.
that
Oh,
I can't remember where it starts actually, but it's about a 5-minute length.
yes.
And it's obviously incredibly interesting. Also, like you, Craig, it is a work in progress.
Right. So I recommend it to everybody to see it and to watch it. So that might be more accurate than, say, my schematic as far as the positioning of the cars. But I decided that I would put the presidential limousine in the. We can argue about when the first shot was fired, but how about officially when the official record has the first shot fired? That's where I put the presidential motorcade. So there are other editorial decisions that I made as far as, well, who would I include on the list? And because a lot of these witnesses moved from position to position as the motorcade turned onto Houston and then turned onto Elm, what position am I going to put Altgens in? What position am I going to put Bronson in? Or the Towners? Or, Willis? So I basically just said, okay, at the start of the shooting, or at least what the official record is as the start of the shooting. So I'm not going to quibble about a few feet here and there as far as some of these witnesses are concerned, but that's what I was thinking about as I was creating this and where to plot these witnesses. The other thing that I completely forgot to mention right off the bat was what a daunting task this has been, because we do not know how many witnesses were in Dealey Plaza at the time. The Ciccone assassinations, one of their investigators, Joseph Basteri, claimed that there were 692 people present in Dealey Plaza. Now, he does not source this at all. There's no footnote. There's no indication of where he got 692, which I think is a very specific number and one that has not been repeated, that is in its specificity. So how did the investigator of the House Select Committee on Assassinations come to 692? We don't know. And I have not accessed Hiska's working papers to try to track that down. By the photographic evidence that we have, and it is quite extensive, I'm not surprised. And while my list shows the position of a little under 400 witnesses, if there are still 300 witnesses out there to find, it makes sense. And that's why it looks very sparse in some places that we know was a little bit more dense with eyewitnesses. That is, all the barricades around the corner of Elm and Houston and Main and Houston, both sides of the streets. So it would be worth it to try to track all this down and to try to discover what it was that made Basteri come up with the 900 or 692 witnesses. Now, the book that accompanies the schematic or the map, it lists things and, well, not eyewitnesses, but witnesses that I couldn't put on the map, including most, if not all, of the occupants, I think, of the motorcade, of all 26 vehicles of the motorcade, which, as despite my attempt to cram as many vehicles into Dealey Plaza as possible, there were 26 vehicles in total in the entire motorcade. So they do exist in my list, although they do not appear on the schematic. And I was just doing that to complete the record of who was in the motorcade. So that's why there are some witnesses that are in the book, but not on the map. Now, Neil had mentioned the Oak Cliff schematic that I did at the same time that I did the Dealey Plaza schematic back in '91. It was, again, just trying to give a visual, to help my lectures in visually presenting where Officer Tippit was shot. And the supposed routes that Oswald took to get there and then to leave. So for whatever reason, I think when I returned to the Dealey Plaza schematic in 1996, I did not return to the Oak Cliff section, and I don't know why. I don't have any recollection as to whether I decided, well, no, I just want to concentrate on the Dealey Plaza one. The Oak Cliff is just going to fade away into the background. But as I was redoing the Dealey Plaza schematic, somebody alerted me to the presence of one of my old Oak Cliff schematics on eBay and asked if I still had any copies left. And luckily I had one. So I've been making copies of that last schematic, blue line schematic that I had, just for people's interest. I didn't charge them anything for it. Like Neil, I just, so I never decided to go back to the Oak Cliff schematic and redo it to reflect current research or changes in what appears on the 91 version right there that you can see on the screen. But again, it was just for a reference. This was a lot less tedious because there weren't as many witnesses. This is more of a narrative schematic, if you will, where I didn't want to put narrative on the Dealey Plaza schematic for fear that it would turn into a Don Roberdeau Dealey Plaza schematic. This one, the Oak Cliff is all about the narrative, what people said, where they were and what they said, and who was interviewed and who wasn't, and so forth and so on.
Jeez.
Craig, sorry to interrupt. I've just put the Don Roberdeau up for everyone to see.
Now it's an incredible piece of work, mind you, but it is almost Kafka-esque in its.
If everybody could take a look, and I'll question them in about 5 minutes.
Yep.
You get a cookie if you can find the motorcade.
Yeah, exactly. Or even the witnesses along the motorcade route. They're very small. It's in black, but of course everything is color coded. So not only do you have to pay mind to the different color of what I'm reading, but also where everything is. So he includes everything on his schematic, whereas I was trying to simplify and just get it down to the witnesses. I urge everyone to look at his work, because it really is quite extensive and intense. But it's not what I had in mind for my schematic. And Matt, I hope you're still with us. Is Matt still with us, Neil?
I might have put him on mute.
Well,
Matt, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
here. I'm still here. Good stuff.
So Matt, you're the only one who has mentioned that he's been studying the RFK assassination as well. I did this exact same thing with the Robert Kennedy assassination. That is, by hand this time. I have ADD, and this is a result of my ADD. The fact that I tried by hand to do this, as you can see on the screen right now. Those
fantastic. I mean, this is the sort of stuff I did in an amateur way, but you have taken it to the next level.
Well, this is definitely very amateurish as well, because these are all, if you can believe it, before computers were ubiquitous. If you wanted to make a nice, whether it's a flyer or some kind of, these are artistic numbers and lines that people use. They're like stick-ons, very, very small, very, very fragile. But I spent hours, obviously, putting all those numbers on all of those. Well, they look like, I don't know what you call them, but it's obviously an aerial view. So there's the head and then the shoulders. So I just wanted something that I could use for each and every one of them. But anyway, I think I have like 242 witnesses.
Can I say something, Craig?
Absolutely.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
Looking at your map of Dealey Plaza,
Yes.
And you're looking at your map of the hotel for the RFK assassination.
Yes.
It screams out to me that this is what the official investigations should have done.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And they didn't. And they
did not. They dropped the ball. Absolutely. So now we're left to do that in the chaos of their records, which are scattered all over the place. But even the sixth floor, even with the immaculate work that they've done in getting the oral histories of these people, even Stephen Fagan, who is the curator and who did most of the oral histories, he asked the questions. It was a lot of these were so frustrating because here he has all of this work that everyone's done, all of this photographic evidence that has been uncovered and has been digitized and cleaned up, so that he has everything at his disposal when he sits down with an eyewitness and says, here's a picture, here's Rickerby, here's Willis, here's Jay Skaggs, which was the new set of photographs that we just released or just recently discovered. Where are you in this? Can you see yourself in this photograph? Even Stephen didn't do that. And he's conducting the interviews in the Texas School Book Depository. He could have at least looked out the window and said, okay, we can see the street. Where were you? Or let's go out into the street and you put yourself exactly where you were on that day. So people have dropped the ball along the way in various ways to make this a daunting task. But yes, you're right.
To be honest with you, Craig, he lets a lot of people off the hook. If you listen to his oral histories interviews.
Yes, and that's unfortunate.
There's some really controversial stuff that comes up and he just kind of lets it go.
Right. And Matt, you know as well as anybody that the most frustrating thing about the RFK case is that we didn't even have its report until 20 years after the fact. So it's not just that we didn't have its working papers or its interviews that I could analyze and make into a schematic. We didn't even have the final report until 1988. We had to sue for that. So it's been a daunting task from the start. And like I said, even to this day, when we're trying to take the history of these eyewitnesses, it still falls short. And just to let you guys know, Stephen, I had incorporated the oral histories into this newest version of my list and schematic. I donated a book and a map to Stephen, so he would be able to have a map in front of him and the record of eyewitnesses, so he wouldn't have an excuse anymore for future oral histories that he takes from eyewitnesses. Maybe he learned his lesson. I don't know, because it has been a few years since I've contacted him or gotten any new oral histories, which again, that's on me. But it would be very helpful if Stephen had alerted me every time he interviewed somebody who was an eyewitness that is not on my map or in my book. He could have just called me up and said, hey, I just spoke to this person and they were there and said this and said this. But the sixth floor museum is its own entity. It's not part of our collective, apparently. So I don't fault them for that. It's just, it'd be nice in order to get, to make the schematic and my list grow as much as possible. So now Neil wanted me to make, to talk about some of the issues that I've had in redoing the schematic and the list as far as placement of witnesses. And well, there are a lot of problems or problematic elements that make it difficult to place people as accurately as I would like. Look, we can't place everyone exactly where they were, every single person exactly where they were. but close would be nice. So I was thinking about, and I'm sorry, Neil, I should have alerted you to this because you asked me to alert you to this. Do you guys have access in front of you right now to the Rickerby, to the Art Rickerby photographic series? He was one of the photographers in one of the camera cars who jumped off the car when after the limousine had left Dealey Plaza and there was chaos going all around. You had cameramen jumping off their cars, filming the reactions of some of these witnesses. And Art Rickerby took a series of 3 photographs that show a family of 3. They look black. The woman might be light-skinned, but they're holding their toddler child who was wearing a knit cap. So it was a father, mother, and the son. And they were standing right underneath the oak tree in front of the Texas School Book Depository, right next to that cement embutment. And the Rickerby series shows the woman and the man running down the lawn of North Elm. She passed their son off to the father, and the father continued to run down the grass slope, going, I guess it would be sort of south, if I'm looking at the direction, like southwest.
Craig,
So
Craig, would you like me to try and locate these photos? Would it be on Robin Unger's site, do you think? Do you know who the photographer was, or the cameraman?
Yeah, Art Rickerby.
I don't know that name. Sorry, just excuse me a second. How do I spell
that? Where is he? Because I have it right here. Sorry.
Do you have it? Do you have it on your computer? Could you share your screen?
Yes. Okay. Do you have the alt? And I never knew how to pronounce his name. Is it Altgens or Altgens?
Altgens 6.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Altgens 6.
Yes, because you can.
I might have it. Let me. You carry on talking. I'll see if I can pull it up. Okay.
Okay. Okay, so the Rickerby series, he's shooting from in the middle of Elm Street, and it shows the Newmans on the ground, it shows Woodward on the ground, and again, in the background on the grass is this family that's passing their son off from the mother to the father. And you can see them standing in the Altgens 6.
I've seen it. I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so the identity of that family. That's one of the things that has haunted me over the years. Who they were and why they were running. I mean, I get if they were freaked. A lot of people were freaked. They're falling down. They're running away. But was their child hurt at all? Or could the father run faster than the mother, so that's why they handed him off? It's just odd that they would decide to run that way as opposed to, say, like in the building or towards some other cover than the open grass of the north lawn. Then another problem that I have is the 3 men that are on the steps of the North Pergola going up to the stockade fence. Emmett Hudson is the one, and on my list and on my schematic and in my list, I say Maurice Orr was the other one. Was one of the other ones, but it was tentative at best. He said that he was in between 2 of the lampposts on that sidewalk past the Stemmons Freeway. Well, the only we have so much photographic evidence of the people that are there by the Stemmons Freeway on the north sidewalk by the pergola. And there isn't someone by that third lamppost. So I simply just put him, if, you know, because he said he was on the north elm. I just put him on the steps because we have photographic evidence of someone being on those steps, just not on the sidewalk in between the two lampposts. So that was dubious at best, but I really would like to one day confirm the identity of the other two men on the steps with Emmett Hudson.
Craig, I'm struggling to find the photograph that you're referring to vis-a-vis the family.
Right.
On the north, I mean, Alkin 6 is obviously cropped.
Yes, but you can still see them in it, even though it's cropped.
Guys, if I could show you something for a moment.
Absolutely.
Sharing a link. Arthur Rickerby, the photograph you're talking about, is up for auction right now.
Let me see if I can do that for you, Joseph. Hang on.
I just put it in the chat, the link.
Yep. Okay, one sec. Okay. Can you see that, guys?
Yep, that's one of them. But that's the one that beautifully shows the umbrella man and the dark complected man.
Yeah.
Yep. But he took two other photographs.
Hang on.
Yeah.
There we go. There she is running there, yeah?
You see her?
Yeah, she's holding a child there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then in the following series that he took, she's handing him off to the man, who then runs down the edge of the sidewalk. But like I said, that's the family that could be seen in Altkin 6.
Yeah. That's the best I can find here. I don't know why.
Yep.
That
is the woman. Yep.
That's the one, yeah.
Yep.
So where do you have this family standing prior to the assassination, or at the point of the assassination?
Right underneath the oak tree in front of the Texas Global Depository.
Can you see my cursor here?
Yep.
Or here?
No, right there. We have it now.
Okay.
Like in that strip by that monument, that cement embutment right there. That it looks like a shoe. Right. They were right there. Because like I said, they can be seen in Altkin 6.
Yeah. Do you have a name for them?
No.
Oh, okay.
Especially if they ran out of Dealey Plaza that fast. Like maybe their car was parked, close by.
Yeah.
And that's what they were running to, and then left, and so they were never identified. But I wanted to, for those of you who are familiar with some of the attempts at identifying these people, there was a French website. I have it in my book. A few nights ago, I tried to access it. It is no longer accessible, which doesn't surprise me because this is 12 years down the road. But it was apparently the researcher who identified these people, his name is Alan Bouquet. He's French, but the website is, I think, Belgian, sorry. Marcel, I'm not even going to try his last name. His website, COPWEB .be is still there, but there's nothing on it. Now, luckily, I did screenshots of them, and like the Zapruder frame 151 that shows the people between the sprocket holes of the digitized Zapruder film. You can see from the edge of the top of the Stemmons Freeway sign that whole line of people along the North Elm, the sidewalk, and many of these people have been identified.
You mean Mannequin Row? Do you?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, from the Stemmons sign to the lamppost, but it's from the lamppost onward that is going north towards the Texas School Book Depository that there are problems with how many people are there and who's been identified and how they were identified. The problem is that when I was compiling my list again, or rewriting my list, and had access to these two websites, there was no sourcing for their placement or their identification of these people. They simply referred back to their official statements, either by the Secret Service or the FBI. Well, I have access to their statements to the Secret Service and the FBI or Dallas police or sheriffs. They never identified themselves in the Zapruder film or in any other film because the investigators weren't interested in that. Didn't have access to that yet when they were questioning these people. So how it is that this French researcher or even Dutch researcher said that was able to identify the secretaries from the Texas School Book Depository is beyond me. June DeShong and John Templin can be seen because they did in fact pick themselves out in recent years as that was what I was wearing and that's where I am and that's me. So but the other ones like Mary Woodward and Ann Donaldson and Maggie Brown, Jane Barry, all the secretaries from the different publishing companies, there's no sourcing as to how they identified these people being in these places as seen in the Zapruder frame. So that's the only problem with attempts to identify them. As far as I know, these men and women have never picked themselves out in the Zapruder film and said, yes, that's definitely me because I was wearing this coat or this skirt or, so that's a problem. But again, I wish these websites were still up so you guys could refer to them. I have screenshots of their attempts at identifying not only Mannequin Row, but also they also did the Croft photograph, Croft photo 3, which is the one that Jackie Kennedy. Croft was standing right next to Phil Willis at the southwest corner of Elm and Houston. And when the motorcade came right in front of him, he took a color picture of the presidential limousine, and Jackie Kennedy is looking right at him. So behind her, how many do I have in the Croft? 19 people are shown in Croft 3 that were not identified in Zapruder 151 because that's not Mannequin Row. That's further north on the street. But 19 people that we have here. And then luckily it was in color, so we have all of their clothes. You can see their skin pigmentation, so we know who's black and who's white. And it's just too bad that we can't identify these people, but 19 people that are right there. And then the people that are in front of the Texas School Book Depository, not just in the street itself, but also actually standing in front of, like near the Elm Street extension, the actual entrance to the Texas School Book Depository. And I'm sure, Neil, you asked me about that, about the controversy over the placement of people on the steps. Because guys, if you can see that one of the things that I added new to my schematic was a detail in the upper right-hand corner, a detail of the steps or the entrance of the Texas School Book Depository. So because I was cramming so much into the Texas School Book Depository as it was at the top of the map, I wanted to at least show a little semblance of order on the steps. And yeah, the controversy is around who says they were with who and when. In my experience, what I've read is that some people confuse the investigator's question, or for convenience sake said that so-and-so was with me when in fact so-and-so was simply just near them, or they had seen them in the crowd somewhere and they would include them as saying they were with me when they actually weren't. So and of course, with the steps of the Texas School Book Depository, again, we rely on Altkin 6, and then some have relied on the stills of the Dave Weigman film, because he does a camera pan from the southeast corner of Maine or Elm and Houston, that includes the front of the Texas School Book Depository, the entrance to the Texas School Book Depository, and then of course the sidewalk. But Weigman's film, you've got to keep in mind, was after the shots had taken place. So people had started moving by the time Weigman turned that corner and started filming. So even if we can identify people in the Weigman and stills the Weigman film, it's still not necessarily at the time the shots were fired. We can still identify them, certainly. But if people were in the lobby and then heard the shots and came out and now are on the steps and can be seen in the Weigman film, that's a little misleading. Or if they were on the steps and then came down into the street to get a closer look, again, that's misleading. But that's part of the problem, is that when these people were interviewed for the first time, second time, even when they testified, they were not given photographs, amateur or professional photographs that were taken that day, and said, can you see yourself in this film or in this picture? At best, when they were being deposed by the Warren Commission, they were given an aerial photograph of Dealey Plaza, and they were told to put an A or a B or a C where you were standing. But they did that for each and every witness. They didn't do it like at the end of the Warren Commission's investigation. There was not one singular aerial photograph of Dealey Plaza with multiple marks on it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Each witness had its own clean aerial photograph of Dealey Plaza on which to put themselves. So, they didn't have any reference other than a very sketchy aerial photograph, and no other reference of people that were around them, that they knew to be around them. But like I said, that was only for maybe 5 or 6 witnesses that they did that for. So those are some of the problems that I have, and we'll still be working in the future to try to remedy. But most of these groupings that we're talking about, Mannequin Row, in front of the Texas School Book Depository, the steps, all of the sheriffs that were at Maine and Houston in front of the sheriff's office, that's also a eyewitness grouping that I talk about in the appendix of my book. So I talk about the different groupings of people. If they were working for the publishing companies in the Texas School Book Depository and they took their lunch, they did sometimes go out as groups. So we have groups of people. And that's why I thought it would be helpful, at least as an appendix, to talk about the different groupings and who said where they were and who they were with, just to try to clarify. It doesn't obviously identify them in any photographs, but at least it gives us an idea. It gives the reader an idea of why I put certain people on the map and the reasons that I have. done that because of their own statements.
Yeah, just Craig, just follow on from that point, towards the end of the book, in the appendices, I mean, vis-a-vis eyewitness groupings, there's probably, I don't know, 20 pages here where you focus on those problems.
Right. Yep. And then, of course, I have an epilogue right before that appendix, Neil, where I talk about some of the other problems well, not problems, but some of the other things that I will be either focusing on in the future, or was hoping that some other researchers would focus on and let me in on. I told you already about the two men standing with Emmett Hudson on the steps of the North Pergola. Identify and interview, if possible, the 4 other employees of the Justin McCarty. Wasn't that a dress manufacturer in the Daltex building that Wilma Bond and Marie Muchmore worked for? So there were 4 other employees from that same company that were with Bond and Muchmore. We don't know their identities. There were other employees of Wallace Beard Plumbing Company that was alluded to in Jim Marr's book Crossfire. That's never been identified. There were 5 additional U.S. postal employees that were allegedly watching the motorcade through binoculars from the Terminal Annex building, that was discovered and briefly alluded to by Gerald Posner in his book Case Closed. Yes, and so we've got to reprocess the oral histories that have been done at the 6th floor museum. A comprehensive follow-through and/or consensus concerning those witnesses whose identity or presence in Dealey Plaza hasn't yet been established or remains in question. Gary Campbell, Mike Nally, Beverly Oliver, Charles Rogers, Norman Similis, Alan Smith, and Stephen Louis Witt. So these are people that I have on my list reluctantly, because I actually do have them in their names are in italices, because I either doubt their existence or it hasn't been firmly established. And that's all discussed in my book, of course, under their names. So maybe to make it a little clearer, and Neil, maybe, I don't know if you can put it up to the camera so people can see. Every witness, I have their name, their full name if I have it, their corresponding number on the map so that they can be found very quickly, what their occupation was, their location, and the direction and number of shots that they thought they heard. So there are basically 4 columns for each of the witness entries. And then I give...
So Craig,
yes.
sorry to should we start off with somebody easy and not controversial at all, of course? Victoria Adams.
Absolutely. The very first one.
Very first one, who people are spatting about all over the place at the moment, as you can imagine.
Right.
So I don't know if people can see that. Can they see that okay?
See what?
I put up the book. Can you see it or not? No?
Oh,
Not yet. Still got the schematic.
Shall I stop sharing? Let me just stop sharing then. Just bear with.
Okay, that does it.
Yeah, just I don't know whether you can really see the detail of that, but
No.
to Craig's point, we have the name of the witness, the number that she appears on the schematic, what she did or where she was, what she did as an occupation, location, and if she was asked about the number of shots, what she said then. And then obviously below that, for each and every witness, there are sources, whether it's FBI affidavits or whether it's Warren Commission exhibits, sheriff affidavits, whatever. So, Craig, if you
So-
want to elaborate on the sources. Yeah.
Right. So I make a distinction between sources and accounts. So I have a list of sources, and that is everything from their name. I also actually indicate if the person has died. So that kind of information, their name, how they died or when they died, their occupation, their location, or their opinions about the shots. That's what I'm sourcing. So right underneath all that, I source all of that material. Then underneath the sources, I have something that's called accounts. That is, in chronological order, what interviews they gave to whom and when. So for Victoria Adams, her first interview was by the FBI on November 24th, and where it's found in the commission document 5, page 39 to 40. Then she gave a statement to the Dallas Police Department on February 17th, and where it can be found. It can be found in the municipal archives of Dallas online, and where that can be found. And then she was interviewed by the FBI again on March 23rd, and where that's found. And then she testified before the Warren Commission on April 7th, and where that can be found. So every single time somebody was interviewed by an official body, that's what the accounts are and where you can find them. In other words, don't take my word for it. Here's where you can find the original, or here's where you can find where I got my information, so you can make sure that I'm not, being vague or putting words in people's mouths. If there are other controversies about their location or about their opinions, if there was something about their interview or their deposition or their testimony that I thought was interesting, then I have a section underneath their name, just notes. There are, like with Gordon Arnold, who was the star of The Men Who Killed Kennedy, at least the first part. That has a very long notes section to it. But let me just give you an example.
Sorry, Craig, if you look, here's Gordon Arnold in the book.
Yes.
And this page here is full of
all
notes.
Yep.
And then the top of this page is notes as well.
I wanted to give you one that wasn't quite so intense or long. Okay, so we'll just go with O.V. Campbell, who is the vice president of the Texas School Book Depository. And under the section of notes, I say, Campbell told Detective Jim Lavelle that he and Roy Truly waited for the motorcade on the front steps of the Texas School Book Depository until it had turned onto Houston Street. After which, quote, we then walked across Elm Street and stood on the curb near the parade as it turned from Houston Street down under the underpass, end quote. Campbell later told the FBI that he remembered that Carolyn Arnold, Geraldine Reed, and Bonnie Ritchie, quote, were standing at my elbow and likewise witnessed the assassination, end quote. Campbell was consistent, although more specific, in subsequent statements regarding his opinion to the direction of the shots. Quote, Mr. Campbell heard the shots being fired from a point which he thought was near the railroad tracks, end quote. Quote, and that was from November 26th. Quote, I heard the shots. It sounded like they came from the knoll near the railroad tracks, end quote. That's from February 64. Quote, I heard shots being fired from a point which I thought was near the railroad tracks, end quote. That's from March 64. So again, that was entirely too loquacious for me to put underneath the direction that they thought the shots came in. So I put it under the notes section so that I could show how either more specific or less specific a witness got, depending on how many times they had been interviewed over the months. So that's why the notes were handy, or at least expounding upon where I sourced this information came in handy, or is helpful to the reader. Yeah. So
Okay.
that's basically how the list is set up. As far as showing, a distillation of all of those sources, but still giving you all of those sources to look them up yourself, and just to become familiar with some of the archives that we have now online. I mean, when I was doing this, we didn't have Harold Weisberg's archive online yet, but now we do. So Mary Farrell, Harold Weisberg, Matt, we have Philip Melanson's archive online now. So as we continue to progress in the years, unfortunately, we get further and further away from the event, and witnesses die, and the recollections are even less reliable. But it's the advent of technology and people catching up with putting that stuff online. Newspaper research is incredibly frustrating at this point because they keep adding newspapers. So it's like I already searched that database, found everything I needed, but they're now adding more editions or more newspapers, or a longer run of newspapers. So I've got to search that very database again. But that's for newspapers. But if you have not visited the municipal records online for the Dallas County, I recommend that, because that is incredibly interesting to see the original documents scanned, and you can bet your ass I was comparing the multi copies. It's the exact same statement, but there are multiple copies throughout the collection. I was comparing the signatures to make sure that they were the same signature of the witness. The conspiratorial mind that I have. I do recommend you guys, if you have not visited the Sixth Floor Museum online. Of course, I don't expect you to fly all the way from London to Dallas. You can, but that's online. So, and of course, even the JFK library has some wonderful oral histories that I relied upon, because again, some of the people that were in the White House, either press buses or even guests of President Kennedy's who were in the motorcade, were never interviewed. So they gave their oral histories. Those are in the JFK library. The LBJ library I also went through as far as oral histories are concerned, and got some information there too. So, but all that's in my book. And I'm very sorry. Like I said, this current edition that you have, Neil, published in 2010. So that's the most updated one, but that's 12 years ago.
Yeah.
So a lot of the links that I have are dead at this point. So at any time, if anybody wants to reach out to me to let me know that it's a dead link or an updated link, or I'm what I should do is in 2023, because it's another anniversary, I should update my list and incorporate all that.
Yeah, I bet you're glad that I reached out to you, huh?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's your life screwed for the next year or so. I think that was fascinating. Thank you, really, for going through your history there. Can I just suggest to everybody that we take, say, a 5-minute comfort or drinks break, and then I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions, Craig. Perhaps we can then open it all up to the floor. Is that okay for everybody?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Let's just take 5 then. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Right, I'm back, Craig. I don't know if anybody else is.
Neil, can you hear me? Neil?
I can. Sorry, I was on mute.
That's right. Apparently, Art Rickerby was also a very famous sports photographer. So when you do a search for his images, a lot of them are sports.
Really?
So that's why it's hard to find his his assassination ones, because in the whole scheme of things, obviously,
Yeah, I mean that was one day in the life of his career. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And only 3 images, because like I said, a lot of these cameramen jumped off their car, took their photographs, and then tried to jump back on.
I did find a very good website which had all the positions of every cameraman and photographer, actually.
And what's that?
I found a website that located every cameraman.
Which site is this?
Oh man, let me think about this.
Okay, well, it doesn't have to be now. I mean, just because look, I know that Sprague did a lot of work.
It might have been Dennis Morissette.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
It might be his website, actually. I'll look into it and I'll ping you an email.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Craig, do you know who took the picture of James Tagg standing by the abutment?
You mean right after the shots were taken?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I was just looking at it.
Was that Cancellara?
It may have been,
because he took pictures of the bridge in the South Knoll, didn't he?
Yep. Hold on. Because I have it in my collection. Post assassination.
Yeah.
Yes, that's Cancellara. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's Cancellara 1.
Okay. On your diagram, you show a vehicle egressing from the south tunnel on the overpass. What?
Yes. Yeah. Is that Nolan? Is that John Nolan? I think 24. Yeah, John Dolan. So let me read from. He was an employee of something called the Sportatorium. His FBI interview was from December 17th, 63, and it can be found in Commission Document 205, page 32. So I don't have any other notes than that. There were, as you can see in Cancellara 1, there are other people who are parked there because they had cut off commerce at that point. So people were actually driving there, stopping, and parked. These are all parked cars. They're not driving through.
Right.
So I can see somebody in a pickup truck, in the flatbed of a pickup truck. That's another witness right there. I think I do see people in the occupants of these cars, again, just sitting there.
Yeah.
And those
Tagg's car was underneath. He hadn't come out yet. He stopped. Right?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, Tague said that he ran into heavy traffic, and that's why he parked up.
Oh, that might have been.
Yeah.
What's astounding to me, of course, it wouldn't happen now, is that the police just casually let all these people park their cars there.
Absolutely.
With all these pickup trucks with rifles in the back and everything in Texas, at least.
Right. And in Cancellara, you see a large truck, like a U-Haul truck. It doesn't say U-Haul, but it's a large truck. Anything or anybody could be in that. Right. Absolutely. The security was irresponsible at best.
If you look
we know
carefully,
that now.
Sorry, Mike, you carry on.
No, just that we know now how bad the security actually was.
Mm-hmm.
We know, of course, that you contrast this with, say, the way the Obamas were treated in the first inauguration parade.
Right.
They stayed behind armor virtually all the way, and they were surrounded by Secret Service and police at every stage. And the Kennedys were just allowed to just about roam around in an open car.
Absolutely.
Lots of parked cars and people standing around, nobody checking on those people.
Yeah, and no police presence over there. Absolutely. At least if you had a couple of officers standing, on Main Street right there in front of those cars, just at least to keep an eye out. You're absolutely right.
Yes. I mean, I don't want to make anything of it. That's the way
yeah.
worked.
Yep.
If you look carefully at the Cancellara wider perspective photograph of the South Knoll, you can, if you want to see things, you can see a guy with a gun.
Yeah, if you want to see things, sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhere between the equivalent steps where the gardener was on the north side.
Yes.
And the railway bridge, somewhere around halfway, looks like somebody's got a rifle on a diagonal. I mean, if you want to see things, it's surprising how thin the foliage is over there, actually, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's not matured at all.
Yeah.
And you can see way beyond to that kind of southwest aspect of Dallas.
Yeah.
All right. Is everybody back now? I think everybody is, aren't they? Yeah. Just before you ask some questions, there's been some really good links that have been put into the chat box by Joe. If anybody wants to pull up, all of those links. I don't know whether the links get saved once we've recorded this or not, but anyway.
Probably not.
Yeah. So if there's anything,
there is a saved chat feature somewhere.
Oh, is there? I don't know how to do that. I'm a newbie at this, to be honest with you, Joe. But anyway, if you're interested in the Rickaby photos or any of the other things that Joe's put in there, copy and paste whilst we're still on. Right. Okay. Questions then. Anybody got some questions?
Yes, I've several. Well, not so much questions, observations, and be interested in Craig's perspective of this. First of all, thank you very much, Craig, for a really talk.
My pleasure.
You are the sort of researcher that I really got a lot of time for, because you don't just regurgitate other people's work, you actually put in the legwork and find out new stuff. So well done to you.
Thank you.
Secondly, you have to forgive me. I don't follow the JFK case religiously, and I haven't come across you before. So how do I get hold of your book? I'll be very interested in getting hold of your book if it's still available.
It is. Yeah, both the list and the schematic are available on my WordPress website. Neil, will you include?
Yeah, I'll put it. I think I included it in the invitation, but I'll just share my screen.
You did.
And try and pull it up for you guys.
Okay,
fine.
But ahead of time, I must apologize as I don't know where I apologized before. Unfortunately, shipping, as Neil well knows, is exorbitant, and it just keeps going up. And I feel bad about having to charge nearly as much for shipping as for the actual product itself. In trying to change those prices, those shipping prices, I basically wiped out all of the pay now for PayPal buttons that I did have on my website that worked really well until I tried to fuss with it. So because I'm technologically inept, I no longer have pay now buttons. You literally have to go to PayPal, put in my account, and then you pay through there. And then just let me know what your address is and what you've bought. So I apologize for any inconvenience that gives to anybody. I'm hoping to find somebody who will take the time to straighten out my website as opposed to me doing it, because if I do it, it's just not going to happen.
Can I suggest, if you ever come to one of our meetings, bring a pile of your books.
There you go. Okay.
One thing I'll say is I've paid a lot of money in shipping for some really, really shit books.
Yeah, yep.
So I'll be happy to pay.
You should never have asked Gerald Posner to ship you that book, mate. I tell
exactly.
You.
Exactly. Or Belosi.
So anyway, depending on what the shipping is, but it won't put me off because
Okay.
I'd quite happily pay for good research. That's
Okay.
not a problem.
All right.
Now, the other thing I wanted to say was you didn't mention in your talk, so it was purely on where the witnesses were. And I'm sure in your book you do go into this, but I've got a couple of observations. I'm currently rereading Larry Sneed's book, which I sort of do every 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
Because No More Silence, is it called? Yeah, I think it's No More Silence. Every time I read it, in the intervening 2 or 3 years, there's something else I've picked up on. And when I reread Larry Sneed's book, I notice something else. Now, one thing I've noticed this time I've been reading it is how many of the eyewitnesses who are near the Texas School Book Depository say there were 3 shots and 3 shots only.
Mm-hmm.
And they also say they sounded like, some of them, or at least one of them, sounded like a firecracker. The other thing I was struck by is the witnesses who are by the triple underpass or further down Elm Street, away from the Texas School Book Depository in the Dow Tex building, said that they heard at least 3, maybe more, and that they didn't sound like firecrackers. Now, I've been in the TA, which is our equivalent of the National Guard. So I'm used to firing rifles. And I've fired rifles since. And the one thing I've noticed over the years, if you fire a rifle in the open air, it sounds like a firecracker going off. It doesn't sound loud. And I'm not an acoustic expert, but if you fire a rifle near a tall building with a flat front, you're going to get an echo. Now, I'm wondering whether the people up by the Texas School Book Depository were the first sound that sounded like a firecracker was a long distance shot, which didn't echo. And the other 2 shots that they heard were closer to them. And of course, the people that were further away from those buildings, which would obviously reflect sound, were only registering firecracker noises, apart from the people who thought, and this was including combat veterans, who said the shots came over over the top of their head. So it was was it the Newmans? Who was the Korean War veteran? Who was?
I think that was Newman.
Was it Newman?
I think.
Yeah. No,
There weren't any
wasn't
Vietnam
Newman. Wasn't Newman the young chap with the
Yes.
family, and he was the one that
Yes.
shot his daughter? Yeah, it was an older guy. I can't remember his name. He was a Korean War veteran. I think he might have been a World War.
Are you talking about Gordon Arnold?
No, not Gordon Arnold, but you can include Gordon Arnold. Gordon Arnold, I believe, was on national service and had come back from Alaska or somewhere like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or on the way.
Well,
Yeah.
But there was another guy, an older guy, and I cannot remember his name, who was a Korean War veteran. And he said immediately that the shots came over the top of him.
Okay.
And he was standing below the grassy knoll. So I'm wondering whether in your examination of the witness testimonies, whether you've noticed a difference between those who were standing at the Texas School Book Depository end of Elm Street and those that were standing by the triple underpass, what their recollections were, because I think it's quite telling.
Well, and that's a good point. I think what's telling is that it wasn't just the flatness of the Texas School Book Depository and the people that were around it, but the flatness of the other buildings that were around Dealey Plaza, not to mention all of the other concrete structures, and of course the triple underpass, even the people who are standing on the triple underpass. And when you talk about acoustics, even the shrubbery and all the trees are going to affect the acoustics. But I never did a study of any of the groupings of witnesses in the specific locations where they were that may have affected what they heard or what those sounds sounded like. That is, yes, there were some people who talked about a firecracker. There were some people who talked about pauses between them, and the other 2 sounded closer. But I never grouped them together and tried to make sense acoustically or quasi-acoustically of if they were standing here, they tended to hear this. I think it is so across the board. But the cautionary tale about those interviews, unfortunately, is the FBI itself, even the Dallas Police Department, undermine the credibility of their own interviews by other interviews that they took. A great example is Gloria Holt and Stella Jacob. This is from my book. Again, taken by itself, Gloria Holt's description of her location as being, quote, down towards the Stemmons underpass west of the Texas School Book Depository, approximately 50 yards on the curb of the south side of Elm Street. Stella Jacobs, a coworker of hers, her statement said the exact same thing, verbatim. Now, what are the chances of two people saying that exact same thing, especially when it's not where they were, not even close? They weren't over down by the triple underpass, and that their descriptions were verbatim. So unfortunately, I can't put a whole lot of stock in the interviews themselves, or it has to be taken with a grain of salt as far as the kind of information that investigators were trying to get from these people. If the people were being vague while they were face to face, why didn't the investigators say, well, what, can you expound upon that? Can you expand upon that? And even the Warren Commission themselves itself did not examine eyewitness statements, well, in and of themselves, but even acoustically, to try to establish the 3-shot. First one sounded like a firecracker, so everybody was confused and disoriented, and then the other two came, and that was it. You would think that if that line of thought, or even that, if that supported their preconceived conclusion of 3 shots, they would have included something like that in their report. That a majority of the witnesses, even though they were around tall buildings and there was an echo, consistently said there were 3 shots. And unfortunately, that's just not the case, because most of the eyewitnesses were very vague. And if not vague, they were leaded. The questions that they were asked were leading questions.
Yeah. I think this is one of the big problems with the JFK case, is that generally the first eyewitness testimony is the best.
Right.
Because time doesn't have a chance to play on your mind. You can't be influenced by other people talking to you, or what you've read or what you've heard. So that's your initial observation, whether it's right or wrong.
Absolutely.
Eyewitnesses can be wrong. I mean, they are frequently wrong. I mean, I used to be a policeman, and you can get 5 people see the same thing, and they'll all say 5 different things.
Right.
However,
can I add something
in general? Yeah, sure.
Oh, can I just add something that a few years back, I gave a talk at York on the ear witness testimony. Call it that, rather than just they were eyewitnesses as well, but they gave reasonably detailed accounts of the shots. You often find in the actual testimony records in the Warren Commission volumes that, especially towards the end of the investigation, Wesley Liebler would get up in court and speak to us and say, how many shots did you hear? I'm not sure. Or, oh, I thought there were 3. Okay, let's go on to something else.
Exactly.
Didn't ask them about the spacing or what they sounded like,
right,
or anything else. But I looked very carefully at what the witnesses said about spacings of the shots, and they were very consistent. Either they said they were equally spaced, or they said that the second and third shots were closer together than the first and second.
Yes.
Or what sounded like shots. Now, that to me does suggest that you can sort of look at this. If you get enough cases, you can, if you like, do an averaging. And that's exactly what I did. Calculated standard deviations of the errors involved and everything else. And also there were a certain number of witnesses who described hearing 4 or 5 shots. The first 3, very much like what everyone else said, and then a gap and then 2 shots very close together. So there are essentially 2 groups of witnesses, the 3-shot witnesses and the 5-shot witnesses. There were also some really crazy ones.
You're right.
Like the lady who said, oh, it took about 2 minutes for all the shots to
Right.
be fired. Other ones said, oh, I heard at least 11 shots or something like that. So yeah, you have to exclude some of the outliers, but the vast majority of them came up with these spacings. Now, the other thing is I looked for the ones that actually said how many seconds they thought they heard between the shots. And what's very curious is that they all described the spacings in seconds as about twice the length of the spacings on the audio recordings that have been a subject of some controversy. But if you allow for the fact that eyewitnesses to all sorts of other things typically describe the other events in terms of time that take about twice as long as the actual events take place, and you can actually prove this, then this could be a very surprising confirmation, if you like, of the disputed, what is it called, dictaphone belt recording.
Yes. Yep.
It's so close that I don't think it's a coincidence that there is agreement. I won't swear to it that the dictafelt data are correct, but on the other hand, I think that those who try to dismiss it are very wrong. And that tells you there's more than 3 shots. It also tells you that the second and third shots were very close together. You barely have time to work the bolt on a rifle. Now, if you're a really crack marksman, and I've seen presentations on, could Oswald have made the shots, if you like. Every time they do it, they bring in a crack marksman who has years and years of experience, fires hundreds of rounds every week, and they can barely get the shots off. Now, Oswald didn't do much rifle practice. There are claims that he was seen being a nuisance at various rifle ranges, but there's no records that he bought ammunition.
Right.
There's no records that he went in extensively for rifle practice, especially with his crappy old gun that he had. So, I'm very skeptical about the Warren Commission conclusions specifically, and the whole case against Oswald in general.
Right.
That's as much as I say right now.
You've raised a couple of issues, which I'm going to take issue with. I've fired a rifle. I fired it over iron sights, and I could have hit that car without any problem at all. Now, could I have fired 3 shots in 6 seconds? Probably not. And don't get me wrong, I don't think Oswald fired them. But is hitting that car from a Texas school book depository window difficult? No, it's not. It really isn't. My question is, if I was an assassin at that window, I would not have fired when Kennedy was driving away from me. I would have fired when he was coming down towards me, down Houston towards me.
You're quite right about that. I agree.
It gets larger and larger. You cannot miss. And you
Not
still
only
have a
that-
chance as he pulls away.
Not only that, I think what happened was, of the first 3 shots, whether there were more than 3, we could discuss, but of the first 3 shots, the first one, I think, missed, because there are indications in the Zapruder film that a shot was fired around, I can't remember, frame, was it 133 or something?
Is that when the girl in red stops running and looks back?
Yes, and
Yeah.
Kennedy, who's waving the crowd, suddenly goes like this.
Yeah.
And I think so does John Connolly. The other thing is that Connolly, to his dying day, swore that he heard a shot, and then the second shot hit him, or maybe a third. But I think the second shot hit Kennedy in the back. A third shot hit Connolly. And then there were two more shots, and one of them hit Kennedy in the head. Or maybe both did.
Do you think it's possible that the first shot that missed was a shot that was designed to draw people's attention to the schoolbook depository?
I think if I was shooting at a president, I wouldn't try to draw attention to anybody, especially myself, if I were firing the rifle. So, you know, you would shoot to hit. The trouble is that at the time that first shot was fired, the car was blocked. The view of the car was badly blocked from the window in the Texas Schoolbook Depository by the live oak tree, I think.
Live oak tree, yeah.
Yeah, very common in the American Southwest.
But if you were sitting on the 6th floor window, you would have shot as he approached. You wouldn't have shot as he receded.
Well, I would agree
But
with you.
if you would have, I mean, it's a logical assumption that you would have done that, but there's no escape. There's no escape if you take that shot as the motorcade is approaching the TSBD.
Yep.
People will spot that. People will see that. It's a fantastic shot. You're absolutely right, Matt. And I don't profess to be know anything about guns at all. And obviously, you've got more experience. But it's a very easy target. But there's no escape because everyone's going to look up and see, assuming that you are by the window and not in some form of a recess, which is a completely another story where you can't see the barrel of the gun. I accept that. So that to me is what I've always thought. Great shot, but if you are intending to get away, then you wait until it turns and goes down Elm. It's still a good shot. It's still a good shot, notwithstanding the gantry and the oak tree, which complicates matters. But I think that's probably the explanation for why it may not have been taken as the motorcade was approaching the TSBD. One of the other points that you raised, I mean, if a bullet's in the chamber, it's 6 seconds for 2 shots.
Right.
So that would potentially negate that argument. What you said earlier on.
That's still rapid shooting, though.
Yes.
2 shots in 6 seconds with a bolt action rifle and aiming it.
Yes.
And I mean, I could probably do it over iron sights. I could certainly hit the car. Might not be able to hit his head. I could certainly hit the car. And if the scope was misaligned, so if you think that a guy that was intending to shoot the president had not practiced with a scope that was zeroed in, that just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, well, Matt,
I'm not suggesting Oswald was in the sniper's nest and did this.
No.
I'm just modifying the statement that you made. That's all.
But Matt, you said that you could hit, looking over iron sights, you would be able to hit the car. Tell me, would you hit the other side of Dealey Plaza with your first shot?
That's why I said, was that first shot just to get people's attention? It was intentionally meant to hit the road, sound like a firecracker, look like sparks.
I agree. But that's what makes.
A marksman would not miss the car. He might miss the president. He would not miss the car.
I agree. So it makes the claim that much more untenable, especially when the Warren Commission claims that it was the first shot that missed, or most likely missed. That means that he's not even looking at the tree, the live oak tree. He's looking 200 yards further down the street.
Yeah,
and that's the first shot. No. And then he gets his next 2 off with precision and accuracy. I don't think so.
Yeah.
There's another angle.
Go ahead, Owen.
There is another angle on the Houston Street shot. I asked a question about 20 years ago, and they said you couldn't shoot as they were coming along Houston Street because you had to wait until they could get into the triangular fire.
Right.
you couldn't start shooting until he was at a place where the other riflemen could hit as well. They felt it would be too soon to shoot in Euston Street because one, for the escape, and also it would be, the other people might not get their shots in. They might have stopped the car in Euston Street, and if somebody was on the grassy knoll, they wouldn't be able to get a shot in.
Well, that's assuming that there's multiple gunmen, of course.
Right. Yeah, I think there was.
Which we all do, but you know.
Right.
It was. I think Jim Fetzer told me this many years ago. He said it had to be a triangulation of fire. So, and you couldn't do that if you fired on Euston Street because you'd be out of range of the other shooters.
Well, it didn't have to be triangular fire. It was triangular fire if you were in a conspiracy and you wanted to guarantee the result you wanted. But if you were a lone gunman, you would take the best shot, surely.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. I don't believe that was the case, though.
No,
Right.
None
of us do, right?
Matt, the other point I wanted to just not contest, but just discuss with you is, and obviously as a policeman, you've seen a lot of different scenes and interviewed a lot of different witnesses. I agree with you, and I think I was discussing this with Craig on a call before that, we have to place more weight and emphasis on the earlier interviews, affidavits, etc. But there is post-traumatic stress syndrome going on at this kind of an event. I mean, this is enormous. I mean, this is, I had a car crash in Italy a few years ago, and I play it back in my mind, but whilst I think I know what happened, it's not always the case that you know what happened, and you can genuinely misremember. It's not nefarious, it's just what happens,
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think with the trouble with all the, whether it's ear, to your point, Mike, whether it's ear witnesses or eyewitnesses, I mean, this was an enormous event. I mean, this wasn't a minor car crash, a more significant car crash. I mean, this was the president of the United States being assassinated.
But in some ways, an event that doesn't happen to you personally,
right,
is more to process it. If you were the guy in the car in that crash, it's more difficult for you to process what happened. But when you're a third party observing, it's not happening to you, you're just observing it, you are in a better position. Yes, it's shock. What the hell's happening? Oh my God, and it's over in 6 seconds. It's very difficult to remember exactly what happened. You may not have been watching the whole thing for 6 seconds. I think there's quite a few eyewitnesses said that they saw Kennedy turn, they saw him approach, then they looked away to talk to their partner, and when they looked back, he'd already been assassinated. So all I'm saying is that generally, the first impression is the best impression. Not always, generally. But what's weird about the Kennedy assassination is because it's been demonstrably proven that so many eyewitness testimonies have either been changed, not recorded at the time, or pressure has been put on the witness to have a different point of view, that you really can't put massive reliance on anything that was taken down officially.
I think that's a very good point, and I agree with what you've said.
Yep.
A lot of witnesses who've been questioned or interviewed later said that the statement does not represent what they said.
Exactly. Yep.
And who's that young lady, Julianne Mercer, who saw Jack Ruby carry a rifle up the grassy knoll an hour or so before the assassination, or something to that effect. When she saw her statement, not only was it not what she said,
wasn't her signature,
but it wasn't her signature. So that tells you something.
Yeah, but that's exactly why it's still important for my book anyway, to point these things out and to point the deficiencies that even though I'm listing the eyewitnesses and I list what they say, I also enumerate all of the deficiencies in either their statement or the way their statement was taken, or the disparities between the statements as they were taken, as being incomplete or leading, or like I said, verbatim. Descriptions of where they were or where they thought the shots came from that could not have been verbatim. That is, two different people, even though they were together, would not have said the exact same thing. So yes, we do have to take it with a grain of salt, but it's in the record and it's in my book. So when these discrepancies come up, and they come up a lot.
I think another good example of it not, as she may have said, is the Victoria Adams thing, with Lovelady and Shelley down by the elevators on the first floor at the rear, whether she saw them, didn't see them, and the Stroud letter. So, I mean, to everyone's point here, I mean, it's rife throughout the whole thing. Statements that have been changed or misrecorded. I mean, FBI statements, I mean, they're terrible. They're not from the first person, are they? They're from the third person.
Now, the interesting thing about that is that I did locate some of the actual handwritten statements that were given to the FBI that the FBI then takes and puts into an FD 302, which is a summary of the statement. And so we don't have all of the handwritten statements that were made by people to the FBI to compare the handwritten one and the typed one that the FBI says is the accurate summary of their statement. If we did, then we would see a lot more discrepancies between the typed official FBI summary of their statement and their actual statement. I think a lot of people, but this is another thing that we could have done with witnesses over the years as we re-interview them or discover them and interview them, have their FBI interview or their police interview or their Secret Service interview in front of their hand it to them and say, is this what you said? Is this your signature? Verify what's on record with the actual witness. But that's, coulda, woulda, shoulda,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Craig, did you ever have a chance to do anything with Tosh Plumley? He was a part of an abort team. I've seen him lecture.
I'm not familiar with that name.
He was on the South Knoll, about halfway between the bridge and Houston, up at the top.
Okay.
And the reason I bring it up is he said that he heard a shot from his left, which would be the South Knoll.
Right. Okay.
I don't know when he surfaced as a witness, but do you know when he came onto the scene?
No, because I'm not familiar with that witness.
Yeah.
His name is Tosh Plumley.
Right, Tosh. He's all over the internet.
If you go to the Ed forum, guys, you can probably find some threads where he's either participated or where he is the subject matter.
Yeah, he says he was CIA, and they were to fire on the shooters that they knew were in Dealey Plaza.
Oh, okay. Now I have it up. Okay, I had not seen that.
I think he was around the South Knoll steps. I think he suggested the shots came from the underpass, around that area, around the underpass / South Knoll Bank, where the car park of the post office annex was. So kind of behind him to the left, around that corner, I think.
Yeah. But he was towards the top of the South Knoll. But he's got a convincing story about the creation of an abort team.
Oh, right. Yes. Yep.
Interfere with the assassination. That he flew in with other individuals as an abort team, was the story. And
That sounds a bit far-fetched, though, really.
Was
mean, if
he
you have-
the
Go ahead.
man that laid claim to arriving in that pickup truck or car or whatever you call it that is pictured in one of the photographs over on Commerce, parked on Commerce, or at the top of the knoll?
no,
There's
he didn't say that he was a part of that.
no. Okay.
But they were to observe the scene, and if they saw it turning into an assassination, they were to abort it by interfering.
You mean they thought there was going to be an assassination and they wanted to stop it?
Right.
So how did they find out there was going to be an assassination? If they were CIA, who was going to do the assassinating, as they say?
Well, right. But I can't reproduce his whole
No.
narrative.
It strikes me if you wanted to stop an assassination, you would have put the top on the car. You would have had Secret Service agents riding on the car. You would have had the military presidential escort present in Dallas. You would have closed the windows. You would have not had people on top of buildings. Yeah.
Well, sure, but that's not what he's saying. It's much more convoluted than that in terms of his narrative.
Well, Garrett,
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I've put it down, and I'm going to look into that. There are some other leads that I have as well. A Doris Mumford, a Robert Davison. Actually, he took a photograph in the aftermath of the assassination down by the Triple Underpass, and he was selling it on eBay, or somebody was selling it on eBay. But that's how I learned about it. But then a gentleman by the name of John Robert Oliver. Then Neil via Dennis Morissette. You have Irma James Van Zandt and her sister. So there are some leads that I have that I'm looking into, and I've just put Tosh Plumley on the top of that.
Yeah, what the other thing that makes his report of a shot to his left is that's about the position that Doug Weldon discovered as the sweet spot to get through the windshield.
Okay.
And so between the two of them, and as far as I know, Weldon and Plumley didn't correspond. Weldon died, I don't know, 7-8 years ago. But he tried, as you probably all know, he tried to find the best spot for the windshield shot because he was privy to the man at the Ford Motor Works in Detroit that told him about the windshield hole that had to be disguised and eliminated. And so when he was told that, now Weldon was a lawyer, he knew how to ferret this stuff out, but he said that once he heard the technician from the glass works at the Fort Rouge plant say what he said about seeing a shot through the windshield on Monday morning after the assassination, he started to look for the place where the shot would best come from. And I was standing with a Kansas City sharpshooter at that spot, and I said, what are the chances that you could put a bullet through that windshield? He said, well, it would be like you were looking at the Altkins photo, puts you about 25 feet from Kennedy, where Altkins takes his picture, and straight on through Altkins from that corner where the bridge meets the knoll. And he said that bullet would go through that windshield like butter. He said, I'm an expert at shooting through glass at hostage takers.
Oh.
And no problem.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
You're familiar with the work of Sherry Feister, the late Sherry Feister?
oh yeah, I had a debate with her 10
She's
years
the-
10
So-
years
so-
ago, and she I disagreed with how she was having the shot come in theoretically almost from the side versus through the windshield, because she couldn't handle the idea that it could come through the windshield lined up with Altgens as he was taking his photo.
Yeah. I saw her do a demonstration. She came to Canterbury and she said the headshot came from the South Knoll. She did, she had the diagrams and everything. I mean, she was a professional CSI lady, wasn't she?
Well, it isn't very hard to get certified as a CSI analyst.
It would seem a difficult shot. I mean, I'm not a rifleman, but it would seem difficult to fire from the South Knoll and miss the people in the front of the car and hit his head. But the problem I've always had with this case is the Parkland doctors all said the hole was at the back of his head. But if you watch the Safuda film, he's gone like that. So how could you, from the grassy knoll, how could you get it through the back of his head if it's already like that? But so.
Well, that's why I contended in debating with her that the windshield shot hits him in the neck. And when you see Altgen's photo, you see the exact scenario that he describes going right between the Secret Service drivers and the Connollys and into his throat. He's grabbing his throat as the shot comes from the front. Now, that sounds like a deflection, because why would you make your first shot not the best shot? If you thought it was going through like butter, then why would it deflect downwards into his neck? I don't know. Some people would say they were trying to immobilize Kennedy for the headshot. Doesn't make sense to me.
There is a possibility, Gary, that it didn't go through the windscreen. It went to the right of Greer, in front of Nelly, in front of Nelly. On that, that there is a small window. And that's not how I want to explain it, but there's a small window between the back of Greer and Nelly where you can derive a shot from the South Knoll.
Yeah, I'm just saying that Doug Weldon, when he interviewed the guy at the Detroit Motor Works, Glass Works, there's about 6 people that corroborated a shot through the windshield in the very spot where Weldon says it would be possible, but it would be a throat shot. Anyway.
Just intuitively, it doesn't make sense to me that a professional assassin in a triangulation event would choose to take a shot through the windscreen, irrespective of whether it's knife going through a butter or not. But that's just intuitive and that's common sense. I mean, I don't know, of course. I just think that there are plenty of other shots available from roofs and floors and grassy knolls either side, not north or south, that don't necessarily necessitate the shot through a windscreen.
Do we know for sure that the windscreen was ordinary glass and not bulletproof? I can't believe the presidential limousine didn't have bulletproof glass.
I don't know if we know for sure.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
the bubble top wasn't wholly bulletproof, is my understanding.
No, but I agree with what you just said. If you're a professional assassin, you wouldn't take a shot through glass if you had an alternative.
Well,
they had multiple alternatives.
Yeah.
Whether it was Dowtech's roof, County Records roof, South Knoll, North Knoll, Southwest TSB 6th floor. I mean, multiple alternatives.
But you also have to be fairly careful about how many shots you do take, because you may be able to cover up a couple. But if you're peppering the car with shots from everywhere, how are you going to cover that up?
Well, that's a big question, isn't it? I mean, maybe that they weren't intending to cover it up.
No, they weren't.
No. Well,
they only did it ex post.
Yeah, but there's 2 separate issues here. The assassination was one act and the cover-up was a completely separate act. The original plot was to kill Kennedy and blame it on Castro, so it didn't matter whether it was Oswald alone or Oswald and half a dozen Cubans. It was Lyndon Johnson who sort of said it's got to be a lone gunman because we don't want World War III. So it didn't matter to them how many shots they fired, really, because they weren't going to cover it up.
Well, that's not strictly true, because straight after the assassination, as soon as they arrested Oswald at the Texas Theater, they knew they had the assassin for the president. They weren't saying, we're looking for Oswald and 5 other Cubans. As far as they were concerned, they had the assassin.
Yeah, but they wouldn't know what the plot was, though, would they, at that stage? The conspirators wouldn't say this is the plot, would they? But it only came out after the case when people started talking. I mean, have you read John Martino or people like that? You know, people who were involved.
Well, allegedly involved.
I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty close.
I mean, we can't. We don't listen. This one thing, I might be treading on some toes here, but we don't know what happened, and there's no point saying so and so was involved and so wasn't. It's a question of our best guess based on the evidence. And I am always suspicious of anyone that puts themselves in Dealey Plaza on the day involved in the plot. Because if you're a professional assassin, you wouldn't.
Well, I don't think anybody has. I can't think of one person.
Files has.
I don't believe him.
Well, Files is not the only one. There are other people that said they're involved in the plot. Visit Vecchiano, and the people have alluded to being present or not present or involved in the cover-up or supplying money or evacuating the assassins. But I don't know. I just don't think if you actually did it, you wouldn't incriminate yourself. That's my take.
Or you'd be shot afterwards as part of the whole thing.
Or you'd be shot afterwards. Yeah. Absolutely. Can I just add? Can I just ask Craig a question? It's always struck me. I never understood if, assuming that Oswald was the assassin, when he had his race down the stairs to get to the refectory on the first floor and open his Coke, which has been proven to be possible but tight. And there are witnesses obviously on the stairs that say he didn't pass them. But the thing I couldn't understand is if I'd have shot the president and I've dumped 3 empty cartridge cases in front of the window that I'd just done it at, why would I take the time to hide the rifle? And not even well hidden. Craig, what's your view on that?
I think we've lost Craig, haven't we? Where's Craig gone? Have we lost Craig?
Seem to have.
Well, how about one of the other authors? Does anybody else want to answer that?
Yeah, anyone else want to take that up? If you're going to hide the evidence, pick up the cartridges. Why leave 3 cartridges by the window and poorly hide the rifle when you're pushed for time to get downstairs? You just wouldn't bother. Especially if your prints weren't on the rifle.
Gary, do you want to answer that?
You're muted, Gary.
I have no disagreement with that. If you're somebody half-baked, like they want to portray Oswald, then you're so stressed out that you forget you've ejected bullets or shells to the floor, and now you have a second thought about hiding the rifle as you're going down the stairs. I mean, from that standpoint, it's possible, but I agree. If even an Oswald in his best portrayal wouldn't make that mistake.
Anybody else have a view? I mean, I agree what Gary's just said.
Just before that, Matt, Craig's phone has died. Welcome to 2022, whatever. I promise I'll get a webcam so I don't have to rely on my phone for future Zoom meetings. Blah blah blah. It's a privilege to speak. Thanks and blah blah. Okay, so we can't ask him any more questions, sadly, but we can of course carry on. So you were saying, Matt?
Yeah, I just wanted other people's points of view on that. It just didn't make any sense to me. If you're going to flee the scene as fast as possible with a rifle that allegedly cannot be traced to you because your prints aren't on it, and B, it was bought in an assumed name, why would you take the trouble of poorly hiding it before running down the stairs, which is your only way of escape, and leaving 3 shells behind at the scene of the shooter? You just wouldn't. You just dump the rifle and run. Yeah. And it also brings up the point, is how do you smuggle a rifle into the Texas School Book Depository and in a paper bag and reassemble it? I mean, reassembling a rifle from being completely broken down is not easy, and you can't do it with a coin.
Yeah, well, Ian Griggs, who was a founding member of the DPUK. I mean, I wasn't here then at the time, but he did a lot of work on the assembling and deassembling of the rifle. I don't know whether Alan or Richard or anybody else who might have been around then wants to comment on his work.
Yeah, you can't do it. You can't do it easily.
And even if you do it, you have to zero the rifle. You can't just put it together and fire and hope for the best.
Nor did he seemingly take a box of ammunition with him either, did he? It was just the 3K.
Yeah.
Oh, rather.
Well, it's possible that stuff could have been brought in over a matter of days. I mean, we don't have to buy into the paper bag morning of the assassination idea. I mean, it could have been brought in prior to that.
Well, it could have. There is a theory. A rifle came in a box of books. That's one theory that's been put forward.
Yeah.
How did Oswald get to the school book depository on days when he wasn't getting a lift? Did he travel on public transport? He got
on a bus that nobody had been interviewed about from North Beckley, allegedly, to downtown Dallas, and none of the authorities interviewed anybody that was on that route, or any of the bus drivers on that route. I understand it was just a given.
Yes, right.
I mean, there are researchers, Richard, that think that Fraser took him every day. You know that, don't you?
Yeah.
And of course, there are researchers that believe that he didn't live at Beckley.
True.
It's a shame we didn't get Craig to talk about the Tippett murder, because he said he'd done some work on that. That would be interesting for a future talk.
Yeah, I'm researching that aspect at the moment, Matt, and I'm hoping to be able to collaborate with Craig at some point. I mean, obviously he's not here to talk now; he's left. But I think he's dipped in and out of this over 30 plus years, and he's coming back to it after a hiatus of some sort. I think he will update the book. I think he'll update the schematic at some point. I think his interest has been piqued again. So, and it was only when I did a preliminary call with him a few weeks ago, just to pin this down for him to do the talk, and he brought up Oak Cliff, and of course that's my bag, and he sent me that image. So I'm hoping that we can perhaps do some work on that together, along with another guy, Ryan, who's on the call as well. I mean, he's obviously got an architect mate. I mean, this is a fantastic drawing. It is, isn't it? It beats anything else you may have seen, I think, on Dealey Plaza specifically. But if we could do the same thing with Oak Cliff, I think it'd be really interesting.
Yes, because hasn't Sutcliffe been completely redeveloped, Neil? Hasn't it been changed almost beyond recognition now?
It has.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I mean, the actual intersection is significantly different, but there are a lot of the other sites that are still there. You know, in the general Oakcliffe area, not just the 10th and Patton scene.
No.
I think the Tippett murder's a lot more difficult than the JFK murder because it wasn't investigated. There was no official investigation of the Tippett murder whatsoever. Even Jim Lavelle admitted that to Joe McBride. He said, we didn't bother. He said, we had the man, the gun, the bullets, and some eyewitnesses, so we never investigated it. So there's no record. I mean, you've got the witness statements for the JFK, but you've only got dodgy records for the Tippett. So it's very difficult to go back to do it here because there's nothing there. It was supposed to be one of the least investigated murders of a police officer in the world. You know, it just wasn't.
It was wrapped up. It was wrapped up pretty much, wasn't it? Friday evening, in effect. You know.
But Alan, you can't blame them, Alan, when they've got the gold-plated testimony of Helen Markham. I mean, who could fault them?
But did you know that somebody bought up the street within about 6 months, or maybe a month later? Somebody bought up all those houses.
Yeah.
Where Tippett was killed and moved all the people out, so people couldn't find the witnesses. They were gone.
Yeah, I mean the south side of 10th is pretty much all gone. It's completely different buildings, and that happened very quickly. On the north side, there are a few left, but obviously you've got the high school that's there, which is, and you can't traverse east-west on 10th towards Crawford. You can't do that anymore. That's all blocked off. The Abundant Life Temple, which I think is a really very interesting location, and there's some really interesting stuff going on there that I've looked into. That's gone. So they did a good job in clearing out physical locations and people. Did a very good job, you know.
There's some strange observations about it, though. Of the witnesses, quite a fair few of those people who were witnesses knew Jack Ruby, which, you know, seemed odd. Yeah. Helen Markham served him his breakfast or whatever. The guy who radioed in had worked as a bouncer at one of his clubs, and about half a dozen people knew Jack Ruby. You know,
it's actually, I think it's more than half a dozen now, and I think Joseph McBride has said that 10 out of the 20 witnesses were in some fashion associated with Ruby.
Yeah, what are the odds on that? The other thing that was struck me, you know, it's supposed to be a quiet street in a leafy suburb of Dallas around Friday lunchtime. Why were there so many people about? You know, why weren't they at work? Or, you know, they seem to be, like you said, there's about 20 or more people all got there very, very quickly. You know, lots of people seem to be at home. You know, it wasn't a public holiday, was it?
No, and the one thing that's always struck me as odd is why was a pregnant woman watching 2 war films in the Texas theatre? I mean, if that's not incongruous, what is?
Yeah.
I wish I met someone like that. I always watch them on my own.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think Oakcliffe is fascinating. It really is. But you are right, Alan. It's another swamp in this whole.
Don't forget, though, in America that a lot of people sit out on what they called their stoop, and I think Victoria Clemens was sitting outside, wasn't she? When she
Akilah Clemens.
Akilah Clemens. Sorry, yeah, Akilah Clemens sitting outside when she saw the murder.
I might be wrong, but I think she was inside and she heard the shot and ran out.
Okay.
And Mark Lane, obviously, she was a star witness for him. Yeah. A lot of those people weren't brought towards the Warren Commission, of course. including her.
Well, what do people think? Did the person who killed Tippett, did he have to look like Oswald? Assuming it wasn't Oswald, did he have to look like Oswald, or were just the eyewitnesses poor?
Well, Akila Clemens said he was. If you look at the Mark Lane documentary, kind of hunky, She says, and so stocky and somebody said bushy haired as well. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of inconsistencies in terms of witness, in terms of eyewitnesses, in terms of one or two gunmen, which direction they were walking from, whether it was from Crawford to Denver or Denver to Crawford, i.e. west to east or east to west. Of course, the Warren Commission cannot have it east to west because of the timing. I'm assuming that Oswald went back to his boarding house, which is another big query, of course. So you've got guys running off in different directions. You've got some witnesses saying that the assailant ran down Patton south towards Jefferson. Some say that he ran down south and then turned west between the alleyway between Jefferson and 10th towards the back end of the Abundant Life Temple and towards the north side of the Texaco garage where the jacket was found. I mean, there's tremendous inconsistencies in all of this, and obviously someone like Dale Myers will focus on what he wants to focus on, to produce a solution to this, which is akin to, the establishment view, the Warren Commission view.
The other thing, of course, is the description of Oswald. I mean, how far is the Tippett murder site from Elm Street?
3 miles.
3 miles. So 3 miles away from the scene of a crime, you're looking for an average height, white male, average build. Yeah. And you pick up Oswald out of probably 300,000 other white males, average build, average height, average age. That just does not add up. It doesn't add up.
Well, but one thing I would say, that's the whole 5'10", 165 pounds thing. I mean, I think it has been debated on this before. I mean, Bill Simpich has got a real, view on this and how wrong Inspector Sawyer is, who ran the command post at Houston and Elm Junction. Where did that original description come from? And that it was already in the system, that description, so it came from an agency. I mean, there's a lot of work that's been done on that,
Well, it may have been a perfectly good description from a perfectly good eyewitness, but
Howard Brennan.
No, but I mean, well, yeah. Howard Brennan's eyesight only deteriorated afterwards. So I'm not discounting Brennan, but the description in general, if the Dallas police had said, we arrested 500 guys just after the assassination, but this guy was really suspicious, I'd have a lot more time for them. But they didn't. They arrested Lee Harvey Oswald straight away from a really shit description. Just doesn't make sense. But a general point I want to make, I heard you criticising Dale Myers, who's done a lot of good work actually on the Tippett assassination, digging up evidence, etc. Purely from a sort of historian's point of view, I enjoy reading alternative viewpoints because to be in an echo chamber is not healthy. To just have people reflect exactly what you think is not a healthy way of approaching the case. It's good to have people question you, and it's good to have people put alternative points of view, and it's on us to refute them. I don't think they should be discounted out of hand. I think their views should be taken on board, and we should say, right, well, in this case, you're wrong. But we shouldn't just as they totally dismiss anyone that believes Oswald was part of a conspiracy, or there was a conspiracy that didn't involve Oswald as nutters. equally, I don't think we should discount anyone that believes he was as mad as well. We should just take on board what they say, look at what the evidence they produce, and either refute it or say, okay, yeah, got a point there, maybe we've got to look at this again. But I think it's unhealthy just to discount people.
Well, look, to be fair, this is my area that I focus on, and he's written a fantastic book called With Malice. I don't know if you're aware of that. And it's a really good read, isn't it? You know, and he cites a lot of stuff, and I like the minutiae of it all. But I think where he's just discredited is the whole magic bullet work that he did. You know, around Dealey Plaza to confirm the magic bullet, and I think that just doesn't make any sense.
I agree with you there. He's done a lot of good work on just Tippett in general and the history of the Tippett family, etc., and that can't be discounted. I agree. I don't agree with his conclusions. I agree, you know, with most of the people.
That's essentially my point. I don't agree with his conclusions, but we shouldn't. Fantastic work in there. He's helped me. I think he's a really good resource. Really good resource. And I think one of the things that I thought was fascinating is Holan, Holan. He's done some work on his blog, which suggests that she wasn't living sort of diagonally opposite the scene of Tippett's murder, because I don't know if you recall this, but there's an argument that she was the one that saw the additional police car in the drive between whatever it was, 404 and 406, or 406 and 408, whatever that drive was. But he did some interesting work where, through some really dogged research, and I think it's good, suggests that she was actually in an apartment on the south side of Patton, say between the intersection and the club that Scoggins used to go into every day. And she would have had a view from that side, down the alleyway that runs parallel to Jefferson and 10th, and effectively disputing this idea that there was an additional car, police squad car, in that driveway, and I think it's very tenable work, to be honest with you. All right, guys. Is there anybody else that wants to make any more contributions or keep the debate going? Or no? All right, guys. Well, look, I thought that was a really healthy discussion today. Hope you enjoyed your first one, Matt.
I did, yes.
And
thank you, Neil, for putting it together.
Hope that you feel that the entrance fee is worth it.
Oh, Matt? I wouldn't know. I'm seeking a refund.
Oh, tough crowd. All right, guys. Well, look, I very much enjoyed it. I thought that it's a shame that Craig cut out, but I thought it was an interesting talk, and his work is really good. It will evolve, and absolutely, I'm sure it will evolve, and he will continue to update his schematics and his books. And if anybody wants his email address, I can let you know what that is. If you want to reach out to him,
please, Neil.
Yeah, if you want to reach out individually, I can get that done for you. That's great. All right, guys. Well, all the best. Yeah.
Yeah. Well done on your first presentation. Anyway.
Well, I didn't present, Alan. just moderated. Just moderated.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you for that. Okay. All the best, guys, and we'll see you next. We'll see you next month, where we've got Paul Blur discussing FPCC.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye bye.